I thought I'd try and say something different, because I suspect that, well, I've met, I think, around about half the people in this room in various forums and settings. So you know what the SNP policy is, renewable energy. You know we were elected in that. You know broadly what we want to do. I think I know that some of you don't agree with what we want to do for various reasons. And we do understand that what we are doing is pushing forward quite vigorously a vision of a low-carbon, green Scotland, which has with it many controversies. And my starting point is that as a minister, you do have to behave differently from what you were before you were a minister. Similarly applies when you become an MSP. You have to conduct yourself slightly different. People expect a certain deportment, a certain dignity, a certain willingness to, in the way that you put across arguments and behave. They expect something from people that are elected in Scotland. I think that's absolutely right. As a minister, and particularly with the responsibilities I have to act in a kind of quasi-judicial capacity. I consider Section 36 and 37 applications, and these are for the largest schemes, 50 megawatt plus, in the case of Section 36. I'm not allowed to talk about any individual application. If I did, then I should be sacked, so I don't. May sound a bit silly, but that's the way it is. I cannot, and that's because I cannot prejudge any application that comes before me. They all must be considered on the facts of each case, and I can assure you, each and every case is different. They are all different, and I say that because, as you know, John, the submissions that come before you are prepared by the consents unit onshore, Simon Coote's unit, the Marine Consents Unit, which is part of Marine Scotland, with scrupulous attention to detail. So when I express a decision, I do so almost as a judge. And also, anything I say as a minister. So if I say something stupid this afternoon, that could lead to, to my being an ex-minister. And that's the way it should be. Now, how should I behave? Well, there are actually only two tenets of natural justice: that you can't be a judge in your own cause, absolutely right, and that you must listen to the other side of the case. My Latin's a bit scratchy. Was it audi alter in parte? Is that right? Yeah, so you have to listen to the other side of the case. That second bit is the difficult part for governments, because governments have been elected. In this case, we've got majority, and we had a fairly clear manifesto with targets for electricity, also heat, incidentally. But the point here is we have to listen to the other side of the case. And we've had a debate in Parliament about this, where I was under pretty heavy fire, including from some of my own party, actually, if you read back the debate. And I believe very strongly that we have to listen to the different voices and listen in detail and keep on listening. You may think you've answered the question, but have you answered it fully and to the satisfaction of those who write to you? Sometimes when I get draft letters submitted to me for response to people that may write to me on various things, I do reject them, actually. I have to say that. Susan, I'm sure you would have done the same thing. You think, no, because the letter doesn't answer the question very often. And I think people have taken the trouble to write to the minister want an answer to the bull point, usually, that they've raised, rather than a kind of narrative of all the good things that we think we're doing. So I just stress that because it is actually true. We want to listen to people in Scotland, and we want to take account of what people say, whilst we proceed to implement a policy about which we feel very, very strongly. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to listen to the whole engagement today. I understand that it's perhaps viewed as a beginning of something, a beginning of a process that can carry on. I think that would be a good thing. Maybe it needs to look at a bit more specifics, more transparency, an ability to try to ascertain what the facts actually are. It's easier said than done in this area. And I very much welcome that, and I'm happy to play a part in that if that's appropriate. And to come along and perhaps listen to more of the proceedings than I've been able to today for various reasons. But I just wanted to say a few things. I mean, here we are, the lights are on in this room. I personally am surprised the debate hasn't focused more on security of supply. I would be surprised if it doesn't, because it should. And if it doesn't, then I think we're kind of missing a very serious issue here. How will lights be kept on in Scotland and Britain? Won't go into technicalities, and I'm not an expert anyway, but if people like Alistair Buchanan are concerned about it, as he is, then I think the rest of us should be very concerned about this, more so than you would think by reading the newspapers, where the security of supply issue just gets very, very little coverage. Another area where I think it would be great to have a more focus is the pump storage, because plainly the difficulty with wind as a form of energy is its intermittency. And whereas I think a report that came out in August, the IPCC report came out in August, the intermittency factor is kind of overplayed from time to time. That's my personal view, others will disagree. Nonetheless, pump storage is a perfect combination to have in an energy system where wind is playing a key part. So I think there should be more debate about that. Also, John, you mentioned there's not enough attention on heat and things like district heating. I think that's absolutely true. I think it's partly a factor of the press focus, because there is work going on, as Sue Cairns will have been able to advise you, and I believe has advised you, but it's just not really getting much attention. During the election, I remember somebody asking me, it was a door in Carbridge, tell me the one thing that you think you're going to do for Scotland. The one thing. And I said, well, actually, that's not the way it works. Governments do 150 things. This was not the right answer, because this answer was perceived to be very irritating. But I stuck to it, because it is the answer. We have to do a whole range of things. And some of the things we do get no publicity whatsoever. And for example, the work would, or very little publicity, maybe local papers, if you go and open a district heating plant or something, or go around in community engagement, community benefit. All these kind of things get very little attention, because it's not really what the press perceive as being the sexy issues of the day, which are plainly onshore wind and the arguments for and against, usually the arguments against, as far as I can see, but there we are. So all the other things, the security of supply, not covered at all, even although the lights may go off, unless we have the right policy for Scotland and Britain in just a few years' time. I think it's hardly surprising that we haven't seen more about that, but we also need to do more about that, I think, because these issues are not debated. The oil and gas industry in Scotland is in a second opportunity now, and although that does receive some coverage, I think the opportunities to the country are not being missed, in the sense that we're very much on the case with industry and with universities. However, I think that as a nation as a whole, we're missing opportunities here which are just enormous. Similarly, in mining, in the open cast mining sector, there are very grave problems facing this sector at the moment, very, very grave indeed. These are not getting debated at all, which is not good if you're one of the 1,000+ people who are working in this industry. So that's up to me to put that right. So the whole picture of energy production is a very wide one. And if I've got a key, it's that we debate some of the things that I've mentioned that you just don't hear about very much. The other side of the topic of the day, I understand, is the energy use. And that brings us into fuel poverty and energy efficiency. And I think, to be fair, there is a big debate about both of these issues, but arguably not enough. But certainly, both myself and Susan, and really people in all parties in the Scottish Parliament, do a lot of work on these issues. The last thing I say, because I'm interested in getting some feedback about, for example, what could we do better from the perspective of people in this audience. But the last thing I would say is that I'm actually quite proud of the fact that, in the first debate we had on energy after the summer recess, through a process of discussion between myself and the spokespeople in other parties, including Patrick Harvey, who I gather was here today. Other than that, the other main parties in Scotland all have actually Highlands and Islands MSPs who are spokespeople. But through a process of discussion, such as you've had today, we actually agreed a form of words in our motion, and we agreed a Labour amendment and wrote a grant, and the motion was passed and the amendment was passed unanimously. So it shows that it is possible to reach in Scotland, controversial though these matters are, a unanimous position, and broadly speaking that was that we should continue to incentivise the production of electricity by renewable sources and continue to see that as a worthy goal that we all shared, and also we should consider the problems of connection with the islands and transmission charges and the fuel poverty in general. So those were the sort of three strands. If I'm not misrepresenting this, I may have left out one or two details there. But the main point is we all managed to agree, despite the fact we're all different parties, with very different views in cases of some individuals in those parties. I think that was a good thing for Scotland. It certainly was welcomed by many of the developers who are not short of the lack of agreement, the lack of agreement amongst politicians not very far from Scotland. So I think, John, I didn't come here with a prepared text. I really came here primarily to listen. So perhaps the best use of the remaining time would be to have a discussion on what I said.